Hi everyone, welcome to the Car Buying Experience, your guide to a new or new to you vehicle. My name is Lauren Paterno. I work in government and public affairs for AAA Northeast. Due to the pandemic, car buying certainly has its challenges. We here at AAA Northeast want to provide you with tips and advice to make the car buying process as smooth as possible. To discuss what to know about purchasing a vehicle, we have some in-house experts to walk us through the car buying, financing, and insurance experience. Today, we have Raymond Eng, who is the Vice President of Insurance Sales, Ted Lyons, the Director of Financial Services, John Paul, our Senior Manager of Traffic Safety, also known as the Car Doctor. And thank you all for being here today. So first, John Paul, why is buying a car right now so complicated, and why are used cars so hot right now?
There's a lot of reasons behind that. You've probably heard about the semiconductor shortage, what we've referred to as the chip dip. There isn't enough microprocessor chips to go around right now. That's one of the reasons. So a lot of car lots just don't have enough inventory right now. The other thing was a lot of used cars came from rental fleets, Hertz, Avis, and so forth. Those companies had their financial challenges during the pandemic. They sold some of their rental fleet off, but they haven't replenished them, so their cars are not coming along. Also, as the economy has started to change, at least in the past month or so, when things started getting a little better, some of these rental companies started buying literally days' supplies of vehicles. So they'd go to the factory and say, let me buy 4 days worth of cars. So that would make it hard for car dealers to buy those same vehicles because the manufacturers are selling them directly. The other thing is, if we go back 15 months ago, as a lot of people were looking at the pandemic, they were moving out of the city, they were deciding not to take public transportation anymore, and they decided they wanted to buy second, third, and sometimes in some cases a first car for a lot of people. So used cars all of a sudden became a hot commodity. It's raised the prices. In fact, I've heard that used car prices are up about 30%. And I've also talked to a couple of new car dealers who told me that on their lots, they would normally have 300 to 350 cars, and they only have about 50 cars in total right now. So it is really a supply and demand issue, which has pushed these prices and the selection where it is today.
So because of these inventory supply issues and demand is so high, how should a buyer be doing their research, and what kind of research should they be doing before they get to the dealership?
Well, still, first off, do as much research as you can online. It makes a lot of sense. You can look at inventory still, you can see what's going on, but be aware if you're buying new, for instance, and you're buying something that's popular, and I'll pick one vehicle, the Kia Telluride, very popular mid-size SUV. It's won a lot of awards. Consumer Reports rated as one of the best. The press association that I'm the president of rated as one of the best vehicles in its class. And some dealers are marking these vehicles up $10,000 over list price. So not just, 2 years ago, no one bought a car at list price. Now they're buying cars at $10,000 over list price because there isn't the supply and there's a big demand. So do all your shopping ahead of time. And I hate to say it, but for a lot of people, what I'm saying is maybe put off car buying completely for another few months or maybe even longer till the inventories start to catch up.
So you touched on this a little bit, and that the Kia Telluride is a popular car right now to be purchasing. Is there other cars that are selling very quickly or cars that are selling a little bit slower? I was reading recently that sedans are selling at a little bit of a slower rate, and there's a little bit more inventory of those types of vehicles. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. People want SUVs of some sort. That seems to be the most popular car right now. So sedans, something like a Toyota Camry or Honda Accord, don't sell as quickly, but they're still selling quickly. They might not sell the day that the transport truck shows up at the dealership, but they're going to sell within a couple of weeks usually. So if you are in the market to buy a car, you almost need to snap it up as soon as you make that decision. One place that we're not seeing a huge demand is electric cars. Although electric cars are very popular, and if people pay attention, you see an awful lot of Teslas on the road, Electric cars still, there's inventory to be found. I did a quick search for the Mustang Mach-E near where I live, and I found 3 different dealers that had 3 or 4 in stock. So, you know, if you're thinking of an electric car in the near future, maybe shopping electric might be a way to go. And then you can satisfy both needs if you want that SUV and you want to be a little kinder to the environment.
And perhaps take advantage of some of the federal and state incentives that they offer for rebates and those kinds of promotions.
Yeah, it always makes sense to look and see what's out there. In fact, in some of the areas where maybe the rebate isn't applicable to you, and tax incentives are tricky because you need to owe enough tax to take advantage of the tax incentive. But what can happen though, in many cases, you can lease that same car, and that $7,500 federal tax credit can work towards the lease, even if you don't owe that type of taxes.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, so question for you. There's a shortage of used cars, we know. Is trading in your current car a good bargaining tool? Is this going to give you an advantage, or does it really not even matter?
It's because cars are at a premium, your used car is also at a premium. The problem is you may find out that your 3-year-old car is worth $4,000 more than it was a year ago, but the issue is the car you want to buy might also be worth $5,000 or $6,000 more than it was a year ago, or more than it was 6 months ago. I was talking to someone just the other day who had a Toyota 4Runner, a kind of rugged SUV. She paid $36,000 for it in 2018. She traded it in. She got $32,000 for it, and the dealer put it on their lot for $36,000. So
Wow.
here was a vehicle that depreciated very little in almost 4 years, and sold for exactly the same price it sold for when it was new. So everything is relative at this point.
So, I mean, that's good to know, though. Your vehicle that you have right now is not depreciating as quickly and is worth a little more right now.
That's right. That's right. So in a lot of cases, if a car is in good shape, it might make sense to hold on to it, unless you're really in the market for a new car. Maybe it's that time you want to be able to do that. So certainly knowing that you have that used car trade-in that's of value to that car dealer is going to put you in a good bargaining position.
That's helpful. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about financing. Once you've decided you know the car that you want, how are we going to actually pay for it? So, Ted, what are auto loan interest rates like right now? And how does a buyer budget for a down payment? Do they have to factor in the auto interest rates that are currently available?
So there's a bunch of different ways you can accomplish that, but the first answer is the rates can vary wildly based on what market you're in. They can be based on your credit. So depending on how good your credit is going to affect the rate. But our very best rates that we have available in our territory right now, particularly in the the Massachusetts, Rhode Island area, are in the low 2% range. So they're very, very good rates. The rates have been very low for a very long period of time, as far as the best available rates go. So the thing to do is the first thing to do when you're shopping for a car, once you decide you need to get one, and John and I have talked about this over the years, but the best time to buy a car is when you don't need to. If that car's broken and it's in your driveway, you're at a much poorer advantage to bargain because you need that car tomorrow to get to work. But do your research. Absolutely, we have a car buying program on our website that people can go to and be able to price and see what cars are going for. They give you curves to let you know what other people have paid. So doing your homework and figuring out what car you want to get, and then you can get pre-approved for a car loan before you even go to the dealer's lot. So that's where people oftentimes get taken advantage of. If you can go to the dealer's lot armed with as much information as you possibly can, so you know what that car is worth, you know what you're pre-qualified for a loan, so you know how much you can borrow, what that interest rate and that term is, and then I don't want to steal Ray's thunder, but to find out what that's going to cost, on the insurance side as well, because sometimes people, they go and they look for that new Mustang Mach-E and then find out, it's going to cost them more to insure it than it is to finance it, in some cases. To do all your homework ahead of time, Down payments, you mentioned down payments, and taxes is another thing to consider too, because somebody bought their current car a long time ago, maybe they bought it used, the sales tax is based on typically the greater of the purchase price or the value. And they may not be expecting that extra, on a $20,000 car, it could be $1,200–1,500, depending on what state you're in and what tax, applies to that. So there's other things to consider. From a lending standpoint, depending on the person's credit, depending on the model year of the car and so forth, 100% financing is pretty commonplace now. So if you're buying a car for $20,000, the lenders will advance you that. Some cases they'll give you a little more to cover taxes and whatnot. But down payments, it's always a good idea to do, because then you have other things to consider down the road. God forbid you get in an accident. And again, I don't want to steal Ray's thunder, but there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle, and the more you know up front, the better armed you're going to be, because you're going to go to a dealer, you're going to fall in love with that car, they're going to tell you a price, and you're not really going to pay attention to it. They just say, I can get you into that car today, and you'll sign and do what you need to do. And I don't want to disparage dealers either, but they're better at selling cars than we are at buying them. They sell an awful lot more cars in a month than we're going to buy in a lifetime. So when it comes to the transaction, the more you know up front, the better off you're going to be, and the better you'll be financially coming out of it too, whether it's how much you pay for the car, what your interest rate is, or what your monthly payment is. You're not going to be stuck making a rash decision.
I know I'm sorry. I know sometimes that dealers sometimes give you a choice between a low interest rate or a rebate.
Yep.
What advice do you have for a buyer if they're presented with this situation? That can be tricky, and it can be enticing to take a rebate.
It can. And in some cases, it makes perfect sense. In other cases, it doesn't. You got to do the math, right? So if they're going to give you a rebate in lieu of giving you a lower finance rate, you have to do the math, and you have to figure out, if they're going to give you $2,000, what does that cost you in the higher interest rate that you're going to pay? So, you figure out what your payment's going to be, minus $2,000 with a rebate, and then what your payment's going to be at a lower interest rate, but without that rebate, and calculate it out for as long as you think you're going to own that car, or at least be paying on that car. And you have to do the math and do what makes sense there. But not an easy answer, but it's easy enough to figure once you have all the variables.
So there's a lot of work for the buyer to really be able to make thoughtful calculations and not go into it, hastily with the assumption that they can just afford something, that they really have to crunch the numbers and do their due diligence.
Absolutely, and especially nowadays, John hit the nail on the head with the inventory levels, and you have to be prepared to act. That's the other thing is, when you go out and you see the car, they're going to give you the price of the car, and there's not a whole lot of wiggle room in terms of negotiating anymore, because that inventory level on the dealer's lot isn't what it used to be. And if you're not going to pay it at that price, there's probably 2 or 3 people behind you that will. So you need to be prepared to act, and that's why knowing the deal that you're going to get on that car, knowing the financing, and being able to say, yeah, I'll take it, I'll sign, show me the paperwork. So
should you not even start shopping unless you're pre-approved for a loan? I mean, it sounds to me that. No, you don't have to. I think it's a good practice, because, you can get financing at the dealers. Sometimes you get really good rates. Other times they mark them up. It really varies on the customer and on the dealer and the scenario. But I would recommend everybody that goes get pre-approved, because if you don't, how do you know? You don't know if they have the best rate available. I mean, there are people, we have very good rates, and there are other, places out there that maybe could offer you better ones too. You have to shop, and each scenario is a little different. So it's hard to say, but you don't know until you do the little homework up front. And it takes minutes. It's not, to fill out an application with us is very simple. You get your credit decision back, within a few hours to the next morning, depending on time of day. And then and you can go to our auto buying site, and you can find out what those cars are going for on the new side or the used side. And then, from that point, you talk to the insurance folks, and by the time you get to the dealer's lot, you've made no investment. It hasn't cost you a penny, but you have all the information. The one thing I want to add to it is leasing. So right now, we're seeing an uptick in people buying out their leases.
So, you know, for instance, if Ray had a leased car and he wanted, you know, his lease was coming due, he could buy out that lease from the manufacturer. And what we're seeing right now is that's about as good a deal as you can get out there right now, because those lease values, those buyouts were established 2 or 3 years ago when those prices of those cars were 30% less, you know, than they are today. So we're seeing a lot of people buying out leases for a couple of reasons. One, because it's a good deal. And two, maybe they can't find what they want to get into on the dealer's lots right now too. So, you know, that's something that a lot of people don't consider, is buying out their leased vehicle, you know, either because they've never had to before or, you know, some other reason. But we are seeing an uptick in the people buying out leases from.
That's a good strategy in today's market for sure. That makes a lot of sense.
It really is. It is pretty good. And we've seen a couple of people buy them and then sell them. And then
that's smart.
You get, I mean, it's just like trading in your car. You're gonna, you know, there's a little, if you have to buy another car, then you're gonna pay a premium for it anyways, but you might be able to make it sting less.
And Ted, where should somebody go if they're interested in learning more about the car buying program or financing a new or used car?
So it's all on our website, AAA.com, and you know, just, they've not been there before, they enter their zip code and it'll take them to their site, and loans and banking is the tab that you can go to, and everything's right there. So from auto buying to loan applications and everything else under the sun.
All right, so now we know the car we want, we know our financing. The next thing we have to do is keep the car safe and keep us safe and insure the vehicle. And this can be complicated. What are the different options for auto insurance, and how should I or a buyer determine what kind of insurance is right for me or my car?
Yeah, Lauren, I think that's a very personal decision. You know, I think we often use terms like full coverage, and I often say there's no such thing, right? You know, when it comes to insurance, it's really about what's your risk tolerance, what is it do you want to self-insure, and what is it do you want to be made whole. But the kind of the big items to kind of consider here is to what extent do you want to insure the vehicle, and then to what extent do you want to insure yourself or perhaps other people in the vehicle, namely things like bodily injury, that sort of thing, right? But what I would always suggest, because there's only so much you can do kind of online, is this is such an important decision to make, is consult your agent. Those individuals are trained and licensed, and they can certainly kind of walk you through the thought process and the options.
Now, if you're purchasing an older car, do you necessarily need collision or say theft insurance? Is there different kinds of insurance you should be thinking about versus getting an older model vehicle or a new vehicle? Or does it not matter and it really just depends on the person and their comfort level?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, but I would kind of draw the distinction, Lauren, between, is it something perhaps we would describe as a classic car or just an older car that's worth less? And the reason I mention that is typically when it's a classic car, say a collector's car, that probably deserves a very different discussion just because of the value of that vehicle, right? Oftentimes when you insure the vehicle itself, it's based on the depreciated value of that vehicle, which is something that probably doesn't apply to a collector that's restored a vehicle. You probably want to do something more around an agreed value, which is what the term we use as insurance, in terms of, hey, how much do you want to insure that vehicle for, as opposed to what is the depreciated value of that classic car, right? And there's special carriers that kind of deal in that space, more specialized in that regard. The other aspect of it is the question we often get is, hey, and I think this is where you're going, is, hey, what if the car isn't really worth that much, right? And there again, I think that's kind of a personal decision. There's no hard, fast math on it, but what I would recommend to individuals is to find out what is the depreciated value of that vehicle and what do you have to pay for collision, right? And as you do that math, I think you can somewhat easily kind of come to the conclusion of, hey, is it worth it for me just to save that amount of money? Because if I do experience a total loss, I'm going to have to replace it, versus how much is that vehicle actually worth if I were to suffer a total loss and the insurance company was going to pay me the value of that.
So that's interesting. I'm glad you brought up and forgive me if I'm not using the right term. Is it a collector vehicle? What do you call a vintage vehicle for insurance purposes?
Yeah, the term we often use is kind of a collector vehicle or a classic car.
Classic car. Okay, that's interesting. I would have never thought about the insurance differences. So thank you for clarifying that. That's important. So when we talk about insurance costs, I know that they can vary, and they can vary depending on what kind of car you want to insure. Should you keep this in mind when you're interested in buying a vehicle? I know Ted discussed this briefly, but how much can these things vary by, and how much should that help you influence your decision when you're buying your vehicle?
It could definitely vary a lot, right? If you think about the whole notion of insurance, there is that aspect of we're insuring the driver, right? But we're also insuring the vehicle in terms of if you should have an accident, how much is it going to cost to repair it? If it's a total loss, how much is it going to cost from a depreciated perspective? So although the values and hence the cost may not move as quickly as some of the stories that John told about how retail values are changing, there is a correlation, right? So certainly, if you think about it in the extreme, if you wanted to buy, say, a Ferrari versus a Kia, yeah, it's going to cost more, right? and the variability is going to kind of be different in between.
So, but even a Mustang, is going to cost different than a Toyota Camry because of the nature of the vehicles.
I would say so, and definitely even things like, I think someone brought up electric vehicles,
Yeah.
right? The repair costs of those are very different, and hence insuring those are going to be different as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. All right. One classic question, which I don't know the answer to. Are red cars really more expensive to insure, or is this a myth?
Now, people who buy red cars might be more expensive. I'm just kidding on that one, but yeah, I would put that in the category, Lauren, of an urban myth. There really is no data that would prove that, and there's nothing I'm aware of where insurance carriers actually rate on, the color of a vehicle.
That's important. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. All right, now I know in some states you can save a small percentage in your insurance by taking a defensive driving course. Are there other ways that you can save monthly on your insurance rate?
Totally, and certainly the one you mentioned, and even when it comes to defensive driver training courses, I would always, before you pick the course, once again, talk to your agent, because I know there's some variability by state, by carrier, in terms of which courses apply and that sort of thing. But the most predominant or most significant way to save money is just simply bundling your policies. So for instance, if you own an auto and you live in an apartment or live in a condo or own a home, the best way to save is to insure all of those policies with the same company. And in many cases, those companies will offer fairly significant discounts simply by combining those policies into one account. There are other ways to save, if you can believe it. Many carriers will provide a discount depending on how far in advance that you shop. So going back to something that Ted mentioned, if you're one of those individuals that like to price things out, early, there might actually be a discount between the time you actually get the quote for your auto insurance and what we call the effective date, or when that policy comes into effect. So all those types of things, again, I would recommend talk to your agent as you embark on this process, and they can certainly walk you through those things without necessarily jeopardizing the coverage.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And where should somebody go if they're interested in learning more about insuring a vehicle?
Yeah, you can reach us really any way you like. So as a good starting point, you can certainly go to our website, AAA.com. We have 70+ branches throughout our footprint here in the Northeast. So if you prefer actually speaking with a live person, so to speak, you can visit one of our branches, or if you kind of want to just get a sense of things, although the quotes aren't perfectly accurate, it'll give you perhaps some sense of a ballpark. You can actually just even do some quoting on our website.
All right, well, I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. This was very helpful. And to everybody watching, to learn more about car buying, financing, or insuring your next vehicle, please visit AAA.com. And thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and please drive carefully.